Welcome to the PlayCreate podcast. I'm Kirsten Gunnerud.
I'm Jill Johnson.
And we're so glad to have you with us today. And I'm so glad to be here today.
I'm so glad to be with you. We haven't seen each other for about 2 weeks. So
we took a break last week, which is...
Happy Thanksgiving to all of those that were celebrating that.
Yep. And holidays, by the time people listen to this one, it'll probably be Christmas or maybe even right after
Solstice
Christmas.
Or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or just another day on the calendar.
Yes.
Whatever you believe in.
I love it. So we talked to Rob last week.
We did.
And we got that opportunity to hear and explore and play. And explore we did. We wandered all over the place.
Yes.
Talking about all kinds of interesting things. What stood out?
I thought what was interesting was... what he said that really stood out to me was that he doesn't follow a particular path, but prepares for a territory. And I kind of think we walked into a territory with Rob, because we were coming into it really open, which is how we come to our podcast, is coming in the same way that we've been talking to everybody about improv and how we play into things, how we let go, how we're releasing outcomes and using everything and noticing more, and we did that.
Yeah.
So then it also, I think it brought up for us of how do we do that and still have a container?
Yes.
And still have a way of walking through the world where we have boundaries that feel safe. Yeah. Because I was thinking about that yesterday when I was with a group, and it's mostly based in trauma. And we were working on different gifts that we received, the gifts that we learned from later. Yeah. We don't know it's a gift till later.
Yeah.
And how we can recognize them maybe a little quicker so that we don't fall into the trap of it really running our lives. But I was just thinking of the box, and one of the participants talked about how he was in graphics, and the big thing, which you were in this world of marketing, was think out of the box. Get out of the box. And he's like, but wait, that means you're getting rid of this. And he was talking about the metaphor of the container of us. And so you can't throw all of you out. You have to create that container. So instead of thinking outside of the box, how are we working within our box? And how are we working within? So I think what we learned from our first interview, because we've had such a good back and forth of how we work with each other, was how do we go into interviews creating space that aligns with what we're sticking true to. Yeah. And we learned that, which was really awesome.
Well, and one of the things Rob talks about that we didn't talk about so much last time, although maybe a little bit, not super directly though, is improvisers have a box.
Yes.
They aren't completely, there's still a box. There's rules.
Yep.
There's a context that they're working in. There's all kinds of things that actually those boundaries are what help them get ironically out of the box.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So oftentimes working with the restrictions you have, working with the things that are around, working with oftentimes the things that frustrate you most, right? Like I don't have enough money, or I don't this, or I don't that, are the actual things that can take you to that next level.
Yeah, and he talked about
container.
that like situational, he was saying if you took one of our skits and put it into words and a script, it wouldn't be funny because it was a situational moment where in that moment everything aligns to create this really funny aha.
Yes.
And so that's the thing, is when we come in with too much, he brought up the John Lennon quotes of life is what happens when you're planning. Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to talk, or what we really are saying all the time, is get out of the perimeter and get into the process, get into the nitty gritty, because that's going to reveal so much more to you than if you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for everything to be perfect, or waiting for everything to be aligned, or the right amount of money, or the right amount of resources, or the just right amount of time, or the right amount of weight loss, or whatever that thing is. There's that part of us that wants to sit back and wait till mission control has it all under control. Yeah. But a lot of times that isn't what happens. I would say most of the time. Yeah. That's not what happens.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I loved also, he talked about the military and how they changed their mantra. And I don't know if this is true. This would be like a fact check moment. But he said it used to be command and control.
Right.
And now it's sense and responds. And I'm listening to this book right now that a SEAL wrote. It's a novel. But my friend was like, you need to listen to this. And so it's called The Terminal List by Jack Carr. And I think he lives in Park City. But I feel like that's what the SEAL team is all about, is the sense and respond. Yeah. So you're on the ground, you're in the bushes, you're in the marsh, you're in whatever field you are, and you have to sense what's around you. Yeah. You can't just wait. Waiting is imminent death, where this isn't, we're not in imminent death all the time. I mean, we are, because we're living and we're going to all go there someday. But it is that awareness of being like, okay, well, what is around me? And that's what we keep saying with what are you noticing? Yeah. What can I use in this? What can I let go of? What's getting in my way? And I loved how he just, really saw how this was helping in so many different worlds, in so many different things. And his big thing is, what you're giving your attention to develops your intention. Yeah. Where you're putting all your focus, that's where it's going to go. Wherever you're looking, you're going to find it. So if you're looking for the worst case scenario, you can find it. I mean, that's why conspiracy theories are so much fun to play with, because, I mean, if you really want to, you can look around and just start gathering the data, and especially within relationships. Yeah. I might not see a friend for a little bit, and then I can see my mind already starting to weave a tale. And I'll be like, oh, no, is that true? That's not true. Yeah. I need to just step back for a second, because I'm creating something that's not there. I'm making ghosts that don't exist. Yeah.
And one of the things I've been working on is really trying to get clear on when my mind is doing that versus when it's true intuition.
Yes.
Right? So there are things we're sensing and aware of that we're creating or getting into the conspiracy theory or getting into that hole. Mm-hmm. And there's other times we're truly picking up on something and being able to differentiate when that is. I'm trying to think of how, if I can even explain how I tend to know. Do you have any
No, I was just going to ask you that, like the discerning, because I do think that's the biggest thing, is getting back to our inner voice, and that's why I really love when we're working with different people, we're getting them in touch with what they need versus what we think they need.
Right.
And that's the same in painting, like paint what you see, not what you think you see. Yeah. It's the same as going inside and being aware of what is right now versus what I'm looping into. Right. But it's really difficult, because if you've had any sort of background with like a traumatic event you start to filter things, you start to not trust your guts, or if something went wrong you really thought that was aligned, you question that. And so I think that's hard, because sometimes even though it's an intuitive pull, it might not show up the way we wanted. And that goes back to what we were talking about, was our own expectations, our perceptions, our assumptions that get in the way of being like, well, if we do follow our intuition, are we also open to the outcome? Right. Because it might be very different than what we anticipated.
So I'm realizing what some of my tools are for that. So one is where I feel it in my body. Yep. So I'll feel it in a different place in my body.
For
example, usually if I'm creating something or getting into, let's call it the conspiracy theory mindset, it's up here. Yeah. It's in my head. If I am, if it's coming intuitively, it usually is coming more from my center, or even like heart, or even lower in my body, or I'll even feel it almost come through my back. Yeah. Which sounds weird. But that's where I notice that feeling. The other way I notice it is if there's a voice right behind it. And I don't necessarily mean like a crazy voice, but just this thought that comes behind whatever I'm thinking that's kind of like,
questions it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's that observer mind of being, or God mind, or whatever you want to call it, that bigger than us feeling, where it could sneak in and say, oh no, it just rings a little different. It just sounds a little different.
Yes.
And it's honing it. It's like everything we talk about here, it's practice.
Yeah.
Which is hard because, we always want the quickie.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just is that repeating and showing up for it over and over again.
Yeah.
And discerning, trying it. And, our overused word all the time is playing with it. What is it?
Right.
What is that really? I agree. Mine is definitely more in my hearts. And it don't feel so constricted.
Yeah.
And I feel like time kind of slows.
It does.
For a second. And, I feel that was what Rob was leading into, was the pause, which I thought was so funny that what we saw in his diagram.
He wanted the audio from that because he got so much out of our perspective on it that has shifted even some of his thinking and perspective. But I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. No, it's true, because we were talking about the 3 circles and how we saw the pause in the middle, and I really thought that's where he got it from.
Yeah.
And he was laughing like, what?
Yeah.
I just never thought of it that way. And so, but he's talking about when we have that slowing down and that creative pause. How do we pause in life more?
Yeah.
How do we get out of the loop of all the data that's coming in all the time? And how do we create more time for expansiveness so that it doesn't feel so scripted? And I think that's what he noticed a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, when he was working in that improv space, was that the pauses were the most effective when they were quiet, and it wasn't the chatter, but the way that someone would
pause for
stop.
a moment.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the other way I know when I'm making something up or putting my filters on something, is this sense of flow and pause. But my ego literally disappears.
Yeah.
Like, I will be working with somebody and it all is just there, and any conscious thought of like, should I say this? Should I do this? Is out the window. Like, it doesn't even occur. And I am just completely in the moment with them. And and it's the 3 circles.
Yeah.
Like, almost unconsciously, but I am letting go of anything I want to attach to it. I'm totally noticing them and the conversation and where we need to go. And we're using everything together with just whatever's on the table in front of us. And that's the other way I know that what's coming through, or what we're talking about, or what we're doing, and what I'm picking up on is real, if you will. I'm not sure real is the right word, but versus my filtered attachment to whatever I think it should be. Is just that flow state, that feeling of pause yet movement at the same time. That happens in there.
Well, and we were talking about the root of communication being the same as communion. And I mean, growing up as a recovering Catholic,
me too.
Communion was really that special moment. But I think about what you just said, and communion being where we're really listening. There's such a different way of listening. We've talked about that, I think at the beginning, about listening with another plan ahead. You're planning ahead, or you're thinking of something else, or you're not really there. But where that real pause and communion happens is when we really hear that deep listening, where we aren't so focused on what I'm going to say next. Because if we're really hearing whatever needs to show up well, and it doesn't need to be this reactive response. So it's getting out of that reactive space of like, well, I'm listening so I can respond. To just listening and holding that. And then that's when you see somebody pull something that seems like they pulled it out of the air. It's that cool deep listening of like, wow, they just took A and B and somehow it equals C, and how did that happen? But it's really fascinating to see that magic happen. And that's why it feels so mad. I feel like that's part of the intuition when it just feels kind of like, wow, that just went like all the pieces fell into place.
Yeah.
And it just made sense in that moment. It might disrupt in the next moment, but in that moment, it just all aligns. And so I think it's just when you said real, I just think it just resonates.
Yeah.
You know, if it just feels like, oh yeah, that's right.
That's it.
That's
yes,
it.
it does. It does. And it's not that's right.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and I'm holding my head if people aren't watching.
Yeah.
It's that's right, and it comes from somewhere between top of your heart and your
gut.
your belly, your gut. One of the things I love that we talked about that has become one of those things I've put at the top of my toolbox is that optimism, pessimism, and constructivism, I want to call it.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone has penned that already. But that optimism and pessimism don't necessarily take you anywhere, but constructivism does, right?
Yes. I remember you said like optimism and pessimism have emotional tones.
Yes.
But constructivism has what can I do?
Yes.
So it gets you out of like, oh, good, bad, the dichotomous relationship
Yes.
and all the emotions into a constructive place of like where we can go. And he said something about, you know, you want to have plans, but you also want to let go of plans, which we've talked about a lot. Because he's like, look, airplanes and space, that's proof of plans. Like it took so many people to make this one thing happen. So that's proof of plans. But then there's the other thing is when we have to let go, like the plan is not the means to the end.
Right.
So we don't have to follow it all the way because sometimes things change.
Right.
And when we can sense and respond, we can change with it and our plan can change.
Well, and I think that exactly having your plan, how you plan. So there are people who plan out every tiny little detail and step.
Amazing.
And yes, and I can get very detailed, but I still don't necessarily get there. And I'm amazed by those people. There's a value in that, of course, and a time and a place for it. And then there's the planning that is much more loose. Like it's, I need to do these 10 things, but those 10 things don't necessarily get into all the detail of exactly how that needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
So one piece in this is how you plan and creating space. I think that's one of the other things the military probably does really well.
Yeah.
Is there is a plan. Here's, and the SEALs will work on it, create a whole set, and like go through that scenario 1,000 times. Not 1,000, but but
also known as 1,000.
Play it out and see what else might show up and what the possibilities are, so that as they're experiencing that, they've kind of worked through all the possible scenarios. But there's still things that are going to surprise and happen differently a lot of the times when they get there, and that's where that sense and response is so important. Is having that plan, but also, shifting and moving from that plan. And that's too where I think having your vision for what it is that you want to create in the end, but being really open to what shows up in between that.
Yeah.
To get you there.
Yeah, being flexible versus rigid.
Yes.
So being able to see more than what's right there. And I think that's what he was saying about preparing the path. Yeah. Like not preparing a particular path, but preparing a territory, because then you can see the other things around you. Yeah. Versus just what's right in front of you, which is what we'll look for. When we're stressed, when we are fearful, when we are exhausted or our means are exhausted, it is really hard to look around.
Oh, yes.
It's just way easier to just put your head down or go inward. Yeah. Or go all hermit. Yeah. There's all kinds of things that happen in that space to limit the ability to look around. Yeah. Which is mostly that mental landscape. It just starts to shut down. Yeah. So it's being able to be like, okay, wait, I'm not seeing it. And that's that practice of, okay, what am I not seeing? I need to put myself in a different scenario. I need to look at this a little differently right now. I'm limiting my, my awareness. So what am I missing?
And one thing I'd add to the hermit thing, because I've done that a lot, is there's constructive ways, thinking of this constructivism, to be a hermit, and there's the non-constructive. So in my life, I've had times where I've gone into that place and I've just continued to build the story, right? I continue to pile all the crap on and just do it in my own little cave on my own. And there's what I've learned now is not to do that, but to go into that, to do what you just said, to start, okay, what can I do? How can I look at this differently? So it's a time to rest. And sometimes that's a really important time to give ourselves, but really be aware of how you're using that time.
Yes.
So that you can build something from it versus just continue to get bogged down by it.
Is it incubation or depression?
Yes.
Like, are you incubating? Yeah. Are you letting it kind of grow and see? I remember I hurt my knee, my first knee surgery. I was 16 and I was new to mogul skiing that year. I was just and it just changed my trajectory in that moment. Yeah. And then I was at a competition in Bogus Basin, and Bogus Basin, really. And I blew out my knee, and I didn't even know what that was because I was so green to it. And I remember getting back to the doctor, and the doctor said, you're out for the year. And it was, I'm 16, so it's devastating. What? And I had just made nationals, and it was just exciting. And it just changed how we are. In that moment, I was really seeing what was limited and what was happening there. And I couldn't really see where it could go. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot as we get, and there was something you were saying that brought that up for me. And I'm trying to think right before we started talking about this story.
Talking about when you go into the cave or your hermit or whatever.
Yeah, and then I went to, so I was really looking forward to go to Whistler because, I'm 17 and going with a bunch of people and woo, and we're driving up. But I couldn't ski, so I would go up to the glacier every day and I would sit and watch and I would video and I would record and I would just watch and be there. And at the last day, I was able to put on skis and just try, and my skiing had changed. Yeah. And I think that I didn't know it at the time, but just visual, and that's what they talk a lot about with athletes and, anyone that's trying to get something is to have that time where you take a step back and maybe you can see it a little different. Injury sometimes does that in a really remarkable way. Yeah. So you start to visualize and you have these other resources that are starting to get fine-tuned that you're not doing if you're just always physical. Yes. So you start to see the mental landscape. You start to see the power of visualization. You start to see all these different things. And it was really fascinating because that really changed the way I looked at how I showed up for a lot of things was, there is a power of visualization. So there's that idea of incubation or that idea of, I'm just locking everyone out. And I can't get out of bed, or I don't want to see anyone, or I'm afraid, So are we incubating? Are we letting it sit and churn and become something a little bit different? Yeah. Or are we just going inward and hiding, So I think it's a delicate line at times.
I love that. And that takes me back to something you said at the very beginning, which was, how do you recognize the gift sooner?
Yes.
So what did you guys come up with yesterday in that conversation?
Well, it's hard because I think that's a hard thing for people. That goes back to that idea you just talked about with optimism versus pessimism. Because sometimes when we're used to that way, when you ask somebody to see the gift, they automatically go to optimism. Well, you're just optimistic. You just have this perception. And then getting it into that constructive place. So when I'm using art therapy per se, when I'm using image and metaphor and stuff, that's what I feel like it's doing. It's constructing. It's giving us a place to see, what can I do with this in a different way? Yeah. What can I see a little differently? Because my words will always be a script that I've practiced in certain situations, especially if I'm uncomfortable. I mean, that's the beauty of small talk. You're like, how's the weather? How are you doing? How are the kids? Like, so we're really good at
that I'm really bad at small talk. Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is that we, but what I noticed is that you're able to see, like, oh, well, I can see that maybe if I'm more aware of this, I can be a little more aware that when I get triggered, maybe there's something I could learn from this.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's like a gift with like really pretty wrapping and bows and bubbles come out of it and angels sing and it's la. It's not that. It could just be like, oh shit, that was a hard lesson I just learned.
Yes.
But there's a gift in that.
Yes.
And I can use that going forward.
One of the things Rob talks about that, again, I'm not sure we actually talked about last week, but that has been really valuable for me and important for people to know is even in the middle of those 3 circles, everything's an offer or everything's an opportunity, is he calls it EAO. That doesn't always mean it's that. It doesn't always mean it's, angels singing and everything's perfect and you've suddenly just conquered Everest.
Yeah.
Sometimes that offer is still hard or challenging or, whatever it might be. And that's important to know because it gives you the tools to work through that offer and to learn and grow from that offer. But it doesn't mean that this is the magic pill that just suddenly makes everything, what it is the tools to help you work through that, learn from it and grow faster. What's coming to mind that maybe we could do a session on is Hero's Journey.
Yes.
So what's been such a powerful tool for me to help me in any situation I'm in, realize that if I start looking for the gift, that's going to make a difference, is understanding this concept of the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell did a ton of work on. If anyone wants to look up that up right now and start exploring that, it's been kind of this foundational element in storytelling since the beginning of time. There's debate about it. There's people who have different perspectives on it. All important and all good to know. What I have found, though, for me personally, not just in storytelling, but in my own life and how I look at challenges that are showing up, is my reminder every single time that no matter how hard it is, no matter how frustrating it is, on some level, this is giving me some gift I need to continue my journey.
Yes. I think that's such a great thing to segue into. And I was reading from Mark Nepo's Book of Awakening this morning. And I thought maybe I could share this because I think it will be a good segue. I brought it just in case. And look at what happened. Everything's on offer. Okay, so I am quoting from Mark Nepo's book, and it's December 3rd, and it's hospitality. At heart, hospitality is helping across a threshold. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Virgil lovingly guides Dante through the hell of denial and the purgatory of illusion, up to a passage of fire that Dante must cross alone, beyond which he becomes authentic. Earlier in history, Aaron guides his brother Moses off Mount Sinai back into the world, where the prophet must live what God has shown him. Even in Eden, if we can get past the punitive tellings we have heard so often, God ushers Adam and Eve to the threshold of the world, offering them the bruised and wondrous life of genuine experience that only those are human can know. These are deep examples of spiritual hospitality, of helping kindred spirits further into their living. Truly, the most we can ask of others is for their guidance and comfort on this way, without imposition, design, or thought, or reward. This is hospitality of relationship, for family to help us manifest who we are in the world, for friends to bring us to thresholds of realness, for loved ones to encourage us across barriers of our own making into moments of full aliveness. Yeah. And he goes on, but I loved what he said at the beginning, or at the end, is when we're in this place, it is the way that we who have suffered can take our turn, lifting the head of whoever has fallen, bracing their exhausted neck to drink, knowing we can never drink for them.
Exactly.
So one of the things he said is, as you enter your day, practice anonymous guidance by leaving a gesture of kindness or truth in the path of others. Leave half a sandwich where the homeless gather. Leave a book open to a passage of wisdom, or leave a flower on a bus seat. Help the world by leaving a trail of who you are.
I just got the chills.
It's good.
I love
so
that.
I was thinking about going is how do we leave a trail, a loving trail of who we are as we go through the world.
Yes.
And I was thinking about what Edie said during our yoga session that one time is, what are our calm trails? What is the leaving behind as we go through all of this? And it's the same when he talks about Dante's journey. You know, all these were journeys, and there were people along the way. A lot of it we're doing alone, but there's a hospitality all around us.
Absolutely, always.
And so I was thinking about if we could go into this next week with that idea of the hero's journey, and how are we hospitable to others on their journey?
Yes.
And how are we receiving hospitable would you say that?
Hospitableness?
Hospitable acts of kindness, so that we also are ushered through different times.
I love that. The other thing that's coming to mind is years and years and years ago, before anyone was doing this, the kids and I had this idea to paint rocks with like words of inspiration or just a word and leave them all over the place. We never did it. Mm-hmm. And then it became a thing. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. I'm sure that's just how things work. Like, right? Like collective, whatever that's called. Consciousness. So it's not that we were so smart, but there are things like that I've wanted to do that I don't do. Mm-hmm. Right? So the invitation this week is, if you've ever had some way that you've wanted to leave those bits of inspiration for people, just do it. Mm-hmm. Like, make it as simple as possible. Just do it. And then what you said, to also notice where you are maybe pushing back on receiving, or not noticing what's around you. This is one of those notice more things. Just notice what's available to you. Yes. And accept it. Yes. Accept it. Yeah. Let it be there.
Let it be.
Yes.
John Lennon would say.
There's another kind of aha for me was that if you don't accept what's coming for you and you're always only giving, you're actually stopping flow. Yes. You're stopping the flow of things. You're the dam that's not keeping things moving. Yeah. And how important it is to accept those things into your life and your world so that you can give more. Yeah. But you're also teaching the people around you how to receive. Because we're really bad at receiving. Just as human beings lately, for some reason. I don't know if humans have always been like that, or if that's...
I think it's back to that superhero complex idea. We can do it all on our own, you know? Yes. Well... Awesome. Yeah, so go forth, be kind, play and create.
Have a great week.
We'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.